All right, we are in this text now in chapter 14. Remember that Saul and about 600 Israelites, that's all he has. They are in a place called Gibeah. Saul is described as being on the outskirts of that area under a pomegranate tree. I would suppose that is on the north side. About 4 miles away to the north, you have the Philistines gathered in a massive army. The Israelites are tremendously outnumbered and outgunned. The Philistines have thousands of chariots and horsemen and foot soldiers. And they're in a place called Michmash, about 4 miles to the north. Here with Saul is a priest by the name of Ahijah from the family of Eli, one of Eli's sons from that lineage. And he's there. The ark is present. And Saul is waiting there in their encampment with their 600 or so men. And Jonathan decides to steal away without telling anybody, and they're going to head to the north. They're going to cross over Geba. Geba and Michmash would be about 1.5 miles apart. There is a steep crag by Geba, then a pass, then another crag going up to the Michmash area where the Philistines are. And Jonathan and his armor bearer, that's it. They're going to cross over to these raiders, to this encampment. And that's about where we find our text this morning. So we're going to be reading in 1 Samuel 14, verse 11, and following down through about verse 15. When both of them revealed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines said, "Behold, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they've hidden themselves." So the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, "Come up to us, and we'll tell you something." And Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "Come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hands of Israel." Remember that Jonathan had posed a sign from the Lord. He told his armor bearer, "We'll go over here to these Philistines, and if they say, 'Come up to us,' the Lord's given them into our hands. If they say, 'Wait there where you're at and we'll come to you,' then we'll hold our ground." But now the Philistines say, "Come on up here," almost as if they're jesting with them, poking fun at them. "Come on up here, we have something to tell you." And that's the sign Jonathan was waiting for. And he's determined now the Lord's given them into our hand. So he tells his armor bearer, "You come up after me, the Lord's given them into our hands." Verse 13, then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet with his armor bearer behind him, and they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer put some to death after him. That first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men within about half a furrow in an acre of land. And there was a trembling in the camp and in the field and among the people. Even the garrison and the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked, so it became a great trembling. So they kill about 20 men in about half a furrow. Those who know what a furrow is, what's a furrow? A row. This sounds like a field where you'd plant something, like somebody dug a row. And we are within an acre of land, about half a furrow, so you would suppose this is about half an acre. An acre isn't that big. You think sometimes you're going to buy a house, you're going to get an acre. And you think, boy, it's going to be a lot to mow. I'm going to have to get me a rider mower for an acre. An acre isn't that big. An acre isn't very far. I've been on an acre. I think we had about half an acre when I was a little boy out in the country. We had about half an acre. And it wasn't anything. And so this isn't a very big distance. And in half a furrow, maybe about half an acre, they have slaughtered 20 already. Just him and his armor bearer. Who has weapons among Israel? Remember? How many of those 600 men have weapons? They don't. It's just Jonathan and his father Saul. They're the only ones with weapons. He's got an armor bearer, and he's crawling up, hand and foot over this crag, and his armor bearer's coming after him. There's no great weaponry here, and so these two guys, maybe sharing a weapon, have killed 20 as soon as they get up there. So that's the sense of what's going on. Then verse 15 mentions a trembling. What kind of trembling is this? Describe it for me. So is this a literal trembling, a figurative trembling? What is it? Terror. Okay, this is a terror trembling. But I also want you to notice it says the earth quaked. There's more going on here. You have some of this is figurative, some of it's literal. It seems to be both. So you have a great fear trembling in the camp, in the field, among the people. The garrison, the raiders trembled. So men are fearful. There is a terror going on. The earth quaked so that it became a great trembling. And that, does anybody have anything there by that wording, great trembling? Maybe a different translation, or do you have a footnote there? Trembling of God. It says that for a reason. That great trembling is literally Elohim trembling. That's a term for God. This is a God trembling. God's causing it. God's making it. Fear in the Philistines. The earth is quaking. It's a great Elohim trembling that's going on here. So God's working in this, and that's what's causing it. Now, we get down to verses 16 through about 19. Now Saul's watchmen in Gibeah of Benjamin looked. Remember, Gibeah is about 4 miles to the south. But he has watchmen, so it's hard to watch for 4 miles. So he's on the outskirts of the camp, and you would suppose watchmen are even closer. They're scouts. And so they can spot something's happening up there at Michmash with the Philistines. There's stuff going on. Unusual stuff is happening. So Saul's watchmen in Gibeah, Benjamin, looked, behold, the multitude melted away, and they went here and there. Saul said to the people who were with him, number now and see who's gone from us. And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not there. Then Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ark of God here. For the ark of God was at that time with the sons of Israel. While Saul talked to the priest, the commotion in the camp of the Philistines continued and increased. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. So the watchmen are spotting this, and they do a quick count. And here's something that struck me just this morning looking at this text. First, King Saul knew right away somebody from here must have went there. That commotion is for a reason. So do a quick count of the men. They had so few men, only about 600. They could do a quick count. You have to have commanders of this number and commanders of that number, and he sends out a message to the 600 who are with him. Do a quick count. Count your men. Everybody count. And they have such a small number, they can do it pretty quickly. Then they have such a small number, they know the names of everybody. And Jonathan and his armor bearer are missing. And so Saul knows that's what's going on. He realizes that his son and his son's armor bearer have gone into this Philistine camp and they're causing the trouble. He calls for Ahijah. Who's Ahijah? Just told you a few moments ago. Who's Ahijah? All right, look back at chapter 14, verse 3. Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the priest of the Lord. So this is the priest. Saul calls for the priest to come, and the ark of God is there. And he wants him to bring the ark of the covenant. Why would Saul want Ahijah the priest to bring the ark of the covenant? Why does he want him to do that? What's he about to do? What does it mean when he tells him, withdraw your hand? Verse 19. What's that? What's he doing? Take a guess. You're probably right. They like it. Well, they did that before with Eli, and it was catastrophe because God wasn't with them, even though they took the ark. But that's the idea. If the ark goes with us, God goes with us. So he tells Ahijah, bring the ark. But then in verse 19 he says, withdraw your hand. What they do back in Joshua chapter 7 when there was sin in the camp and they figured out it was Achan. How'd they do that? This was the casting of lots process. He's bringing the ark of the Lord with the priest. Withdraw your hand means stop doing what you're doing. They were making an inquiry of the Lord. What do we do next? What should we do? This would be like us saying, before we enter into this, we need to pause for a word of prayer. It would be similar to that. They're going to inquire of the Lord. And then as the commotion grows and things escalate in the Philistine camp, King Saul tells Ahijah, withdraw your hand. Stop inquiring. Stop seeking the Lord. Stop involving yourself in this. They're just going to go. Saul said, we're just going. I want you to park on that thought. I want you to think about that. Saul takes time, bring the ark of God, bring the priest, and he wants him to inquire of the Lord. That's implied in this whole process, especially when he tells him, withdraw your hand. Stop, we're just going. Now I want you to think about, and there's some different thoughts about that. I have an idea, just learning a little bit about the character of King Saul, who already has not shown himself to be that interested in God's will when the pressure's on. When it came to the first battle they were in, and Samuel didn't show up when he thought he should have, and people were deserting from him, Saul took it into his own hand to make the sacrifice that Samuel was going to make. And that's when he was chastised by Samuel for not keeping the commandment of the Lord. When the pressure's on, Saul isn't that concerned about God's will. He's just going to rise up, take his own initiative, and do his own thing. And that seems to be what he's doing here. It could be that he took the activity in the Philistine camp to be God's answer. I really don't think that's his frame of mind. I think he's the kind of guy that his son's up there, and all of this is happening. His son is in the heat of battle, and he sees it escalating, and he tells the priest, withdraw your hand, we're going in. Without waiting for an answer from God. I want you to notice something about Jonathan. Jonathan told his armor bearer, we're going to go over to this pass at Michmash, and we're going to show ourselves, and if the Philistines say this, God's given them into our hand. If they say that, we're going to hold our ground. Jonathan waited for a sign from God before he moved forward. His father isn't that way. There's a difference between Saul and Jonathan. I think Jonathan would have made a good king. But his father, not so much. So So we come now, the king is seeming to be flustered by all the activity in the Philistine camp, and he, in a sense, at that point, closes his Bible and says, we're going. And they're heading into the battle. Now, I want you to look ahead, and we're just going to put a pause here in our text, and I want you to look ahead in our text with me. Saul is going to give a foolish order shortly, and that's down in verse 24. The men of Israel were hard-pressed on that day, for Saul had put the people under oath, saying, Cursed be the man who eats food before evening until I've avenged myself on my enemies. So none of the people tasted food. Saul said, we are in battle with the Philistines, and nobody of the nation of Israel, none of you 600 men, nobody gets to taste food until evening. We're not even going to stop to eat. We're going to pursue these Philistines until the battle's done and we wipe them out. And nobody eats anything until it's done. Now, they have started out at Gibeah, gone to Geba, gone to Michmash. The battle goes beyond Michmash. The battle is going to end up going over to the west to a place called Ajalon. That battle is well over 20 miles. Rugged terrain, in the heat of battle, fighting. Can you imagine covering 20 to 25 miles that way? And you don't get to eat anything. That's what Saul has done. So here they are in this battle. It's going to range over 20 miles. The men become faint, and they can't continue in the battle. They just grow weary. Do you remember, this is accredited to Napoleon, and might be wrong, Frederick the Great, who was slightly before him in history. An army marches on its stomach. If you don't have food, you don't have an army. They have to eat. So they're growing faint and they can't continue. Now, remember when Saul gives this order where he's at. He's back there in Gibeah. Where's Jonathan? He's to the north about 4 miles in the battle with the Philistines at Michmash. So Jonathan isn't there when his father gives the order. So along comes the time when Jonathan, not aware of the order, wasn't in the camp when it was given. Everybody's in battle. Nobody tells Jonathan anything about it because everybody's too busy fighting. Jonathan sees some honey. They get it into a wooded area chasing the Philistines. He sees some honey. He scoops it up and he eats some honey. His eyes brighten up and he's ready for more battle. And everybody else knows he's just broken his father's curse. So this is what's going to happen. He breaks his father's oath and is in jeopardy of being put to death because of it. The Philistines end up escaping because Israel's too weary to go onward in battle and finish it off. The Philistines are going to be able to regroup. What happens at the end of 1 Samuel, the very end of this book? What happens? This is the spoiler alert. Jonathan, his sons, or Saul and his sons, including Jonathan, are on Mount Gilboa in a battle with the Philistines that should have been extinguished in this battle. They should have been wiped out or nearly wiped out so that the battle on Mount Gilboa at the end of the book would have never happened. But now they've regrouped, they've gained strength, and Saul, Jonathan, and his other sons are killed on Mount Gilboa in battle with the Philistines that shouldn't even be a power at that time if this battle would have been finished the way it should have been finished. But Israel was too weary to go on. I just want you to think about all of that. What would have happened if Saul would have waited for Ahijah to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord would have given instruction, this is what you're going to do, this is how you're going to do it? What would have changed? What would change today if we keep our prayers ascending to God, our Bibles open to keep on learning, checking and double-checking the will of God? What changes in our families? What changes in the future of our family? What changes in a congregation, the future of a congregation? What happens if we keep our Bibles open and our prayers ascending and we do things God's way and we carefully observe His will? What changes? What can we avoid? What can we accomplish? I think that is, of this morning, perhaps one of the greatest lessons that we'll run across in this text. Now we get to verses 20 through 23. Then Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and came to the battle. And behold, every man's sword against his Israel. This is describing the Philistines. Every sword is against another. There's Philistine camp. And so, very great confusion. Now the Hebrews who were with the Philistines previously, remember you have Israelites, the men of Israel who are with Saul. You have Hebrews. They're the same nationality, but Hebrews are describing those who were living among the Philistines. And they went and hid themselves when all this started happening. But now the Hebrews are coming out of the woodwork. The Israelites who are with Saul are engaged in the battle. So the Hebrews who were with the Philistines previously, who went up with them all around in the camp, even they also turned to be with the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim is in this pocket of geography. It starts out in Benjamin, and adjacent to that is the tribe of Ephraim. And all these Hebrews who were hiding in the hill country of Ephraim, they come out, they join in the battle, and the Philistines fled. They also pursued them closely in the battle. The Lord delivered Israel that day, and the battle spread beyond Beth-aven. Beth-aven is difficult to locate. If you find it on a map, you'll likely find a question mark, because nobody knows exactly where that was located, but the battle is spreading onward. It's moving forth, probably to the north is where it's going at this particular point. So you have all this confusion. Philistines are fighting themselves. You see that distinction between Hebrews and Israelites. Notice in verse 23, God is credited with the victory. This is an Elohim trembling that's taking place in the Philistine camp. Now you come to the Philistines, and whether or not we know where exactly Beth-aven is, Ajalon's going to be mentioned shortly. And if you follow on the map, you're going to see Ajalon is heading westward. It's heading toward the direction of the Mediterranean. And the indication is this: the Philistines are hightailing it for home. They have 5 Philistine city-states over there toward the Mediterranean Sea. And that's the direction they're heading. They flee north out of Michmash, and start heading over to the west toward the Mediterranean Sea, toward home, toward their homeland. They're hightailing it for home with the Israelites in pursuit. Now you come to verses 24 through 26. You have comments here before we move on to this next text? All right, we go on to verse 24 and following. Now the men of Israel were hard pressed on that day, for Saul had put the people under oath, saying, Cursed be the man who eats before evening, until I've avenged myself on my enemies. So none of the people tasted food. All the people of the land entered the forest, and there was honey on the ground. When the people entered the forest, behold, there was a flow of honey, but no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard when his father put the people under oath. Therefore he put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. Then one of the people said, Your father strictly put the people under oath, saying, Cursed be the man who eats food today. And the people were weary. Then Jonathan said, My father has troubled the land. See now how my eyes have brightened, because I tasted a little of this honey. How much more if only the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies which they found. For now the slaughter among the Philistines has not been great. That's an interesting development of thought. So we've commented on a lot of this already. I want you to notice verse 29. Jonathan is critical of his father. My father made a bad move here. This was a bad thing to say, a bad decision he made. Sometimes we need to not blindly follow, but to be able to weigh some things out using God as the standard. Dad made a bad decision here. He has troubled the land. He has messed up this battle with this curse that he swore. This oath was a bad deal for everybody. This has done more harm than good. The distance of the battle was pretty far. It's verse 31. The next verse we read mentions Ajalon, and so that's quite a lengthy stretch of ground they've covered. The battle's incomplete. It's smaller than it could have been. The battle against the Philistines, the amount they've slaughtered, it's just not been great because of this oath. Sometimes man-made rules are not expedient, even if they're permissible. Sometimes we talk about things that are expedient. They expedite. They help. You could do it this way, or you could do it that way. We're going to have the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week. That's the Lord's will. That's the approved biblical example. That's when they did it in the New Testament pages. That's when we do it today. No other day has authority to take the Lord's Supper. What's an expedient to that? Well, it used to be we'd talk about the trays. We haven't done that since COVID. It's been individual kits. And you gathered yours as you came in this morning, hopefully. If not, you'll do that between Bible class and worship. So right now, the expedient to the Lord's Supper is those individual little communion kits that are disposable, and everybody can pick one up. Nobody else has to handle it, and you've got your own, and that's expedient at this time. Sometimes things that we think are expedient do more harm than good. They hinder. And that's what Jonathan is saying about his father's oath. He's troubled the land. This is not an expedient to the battle. This is a problem. And so sometimes human decisions and human rules can hinder rather than help. And when that starts happening, we need to rethink things. And if you can do it this way or that way, and this way is a hindrance, stop doing it that way. Start doing it another permissible way. Do something else that God has allowed. So we have this man-made rule. Saul thought it up. God didn't tell him to do it, and it's caused a problem in a battle that God could have given great victory in. Saul has actually hindered that process. Verse 31 through 35. They struck among the Philistines that day from Michmash to Ajalon, and the people were very weary. The people rushed greedily upon the spoil and took the sheep and oxen and calves and slew them on the ground. The people ate them with the blood. Then they told Saul, saying, Behold, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood. And he said, You have acted treacherously. Roll a great stone to me today. Saul said, Disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, Each one of you bring me his ox or his sheep and slaughter it here and eat, and do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood. So the people that night brought each one his ox with him and slaughtered it there, and Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar that he built to the Lord. That's almost to a shame, isn't it? That's the first altar he built to the Lord. That's almost a shame to have to mention it that way. But this is what's going on now. So the people are so weary for not eating, they're so hungry that when evening rolls around and the curse is off that Saul uttered, they come and rush greedily, that is, carelessly, upon the spoil that they've taken from the Philistines, and they start killing animals, and they don't drain the blood properly the way the law says. Leviticus 19:26, You shall not eat anything with the blood, nor practice divination or soothsaying. Deuteronomy 12:16, Only you shall not eat the blood. You are to pour it out on the ground like water. But they're so hungry, they're so weary, the curse is off, they rush greedily, carelessly. Saul says, You've acted treacherously. You have violated the standard of God treacherously, and you're sinning against the Lord. And I found this to be interesting. Saul creates this situation. Saul takes an oath on his own initiative that creates this problem. And the people wouldn't dare even to eat honey that was sitting right there in front of them because they didn't want to fall under Saul's curse. But they're more willing to sin directly against God than they were to break the king's oath. Is there a misplaced priority here? There is. And so this is what's taking place, and Saul finally sees what's going on and how awful this situation is. And so now we come down to verse 36 through 42. Then Saul said, Let us go down after the Philistines by night and take the spoil among them until the morning light, and let us not leave a man of them. One of the first things that dawned on me here, how hard is this? Do you remember this? It's been a while. We have a good Sunday morning Bible class, good Sunday morning worship, and right after worship, we're going to have potluck. And you know how the spread is at potluck. And if you're smart, like me, you go to the dessert table first and you get all the good stuff. Then you go back and you get the vegetables. You go that potluck and you eat some of this and you eat some of that. You eat a little bit of this. And then Sister so-and-so says, Did you try this that I made? You go, Well, I'll go try some right now. So you go get some of that. And then you go to the dessert table a couple times. And then they announce this. In lieu of Sunday night service, right after potluck, we're going to reassemble in the auditorium, and we're going to have a song service and devotional for our final service this Sunday. How awake are you? How lively are you? How do you, if the devotional goes a minute too long, don't your eyes you just start to nod off because you've just eaten a big feast. And it makes you even more tired. Now, they've gone over 20 miles in battle. They've rushed greedily on the spoils of the war. They've filled their bellies. And now Saul says, let's go tonight. Let's go right now and chase the Philistines down and finish this battle. Let's go right now and do that. Are you kidding me? And so they said, do whatever seems good to you. Let's do it. So the priest, Ahijah, said, let us draw near to God here. I think it's odd that the priest has to say that. I think it's odd the priest has to remind. Before we do that, let's talk to God about it. As if they were just going to charge into it on their own again, and the priest says, wait a minute, we're missing a step. Let's ask God's favor here. Saul inquired of God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel? But he did not answer him on that day. Saul said, draw near here, all you chiefs of the people, and investigate and see how this sin has happened today. When God didn't answer, Saul knew immediately God doesn't answer when there's sin in the camp. That's the problem. So let's gather together and figure out how this sin has happened today. For as the Lord lives, who delivers Israel, though it is Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. But not one of the people answered him. Then he said to all Israel, you shall be on one side, and I and Jonathan my son will be on the other side. And the people said to Saul, do what seems good to you. Therefore Saul said to the Lord, the God of Israel, give a perfect lot, casting lots. And Jonathan and Saul were taken, but the people escaped. Saul said, cast lots between me and Jonathan my son, and Jonathan was taken. He's the one who ate the food. He ate the honey in the forest. He's the one who violated the oath. Saul knew there was sin in the camp. Isaiah 59 verses 1 and 2, behold, the Lord's hand is not short that it cannot save, nor his ear dull so that it cannot hear. But your iniquities have made a separation between you and your God. Your sins have hidden his face from you so that he does not hear. And there are other verses we could quote right along with that. Sin separates us from God. Sin hinders our prayers. If you go home today and you get the silent treatment, what does that mean? You ever had the silent treatment? When it's unusually quiet at your house? You know exactly what that means. What have I done? I've done something. Have I offended you? What have I done? Tell me. You should know. And the silence goes on. When you hear the silent treatment, you know there's sin in the camp. And God's not answering. And Saul knows, and he goes through this casting of lots process, and he makes an oath that whoever has caused this is going to die. I don't care if it's my son Jonathan. Whoever has done this is going to die. Little did he know that was the case. So next week, we come back, we have just a few comments to make before we finish out this chapter. We almost made it today. Jonathan is chosen. The problem is with Jonathan. And Saul determines that Jonathan must die. And Jonathan gives himself up to be executed. And then something happens. There's a reasoning. There's a logic. and there's another oath that takes place. And we're going to uncover all of that next week. Think about speaking rashly. Think about making up some rules that cause more problems than they do help. How many parents have made a rule, said something, and wish they could take it back, but they feel like I can't because now that I've said it, that's got to be it, and I can't go back on my word. Sometimes we make some rules because we speak rashly. We speak without thinking. We speak without seeing where that ends up. As parents, sometimes in congregations, drawing some artificial line and then feeling obligated to it. I want you to notice what happens because according to Saul, Jonathan must die, but Jonathan does not die. So what takes place there? What happens? Now what does that teach us today about loyalty to words that should have never been spoken in the first place? Is there a place for repentance rather than sticking to our guns and saving our ego? I'm just posing that as thought for your thoughts this week, preparing for class next week. I hope this has been beneficial to you, that maybe you've uncovered some things that I probably haven't even mentioned, but as you've been reading along with me, some thoughts have crossed your mind and maybe have been important to you that you can take with you today and think about in the near future, hopefully this afternoon even. Anything else before we dismiss class? Thank you for your always good attention. We're dismissed.